Welcome to the Art and Science of Complex Sales, sponsored by Membrain. This season, we're diving deep into the 3 T's of developing scalable sales organizations: talent, transformation, and technology. We're bringing together sales leaders from around the world to help you elevate your organizations and crush B2B revenue goals. So smash that like button, subscribe, and ensure you don't miss an episode. Hello, and hello. Today, we're pumped. We're going to introduce Beth Yehaskel. Beth has taught thousands of senior executives the principles of revenue architecture and system thinking. She has been an instructor at Winning by Design. She is owner and founder of Elevate GTM Executives, and she specializes in helping leadership teams align and optimize their go-to-market systems. Her passion is particularly valuable to those organizations around the 20 to 300 million range. And she really focuses on helping them drive recurring revenue and revenue acquisition and expansion throughout the whole life cycle. So we get some lessons from Beth today. We're going to talk about transforming your organization, and let's dive into it. Beth, welcome to the Art and Science of Complex Sales. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm always better when I'm podcasting.
Excellent answer.
I got to tell you, this is so much fun. We get to get on, we get to have conversations about things we're passionate about and love, and people seem to like to listen to that. So that's a good thing,
That is.
Means I guess we got something to say.
Fantastic.
Hey, so what part of the world are you coming from today?
I am coming from a little town outside of Seattle called Gig Harbor in Washington State.
So Gig Harbor, that's not like a gig economy harbor. That's not like a new name. That's an old fishing village from back in the day. And so lots of water. I think at one point in time, it was the most boats per capita in the United States here. So really? Yeah, I think so. But it's beautiful. And it's a nice change from my 25 plus years in Austin, Texas. Love Austin, but it's been a nice change. That's awesome. So you went from unbearable heat at this time of year to you got to be soaking up some 70s and some wind and nice by the seashore there.
Exactly. Mountains, kind of has it all.
That is awesome. And you just told me, what did you see in the sky the other night? That's pretty darn cool.
Oh, yeah. The Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis. We've seen them now twice in the past couple of months from our front yard, which is ridiculous. Awesome. It's very cool.
That is so cool. That is so cool. I've never seen them. They came to Columbus for 4 minutes a couple of months ago, but I never got to see them. But anyhow, hey, let's get into the meat of the topic. We're talking today. There's really this series, and we talked about this a little bit, is we're doing really how to build a scalable sales organization. I have 3 T's. I say talent, transformation, which is how we dive in, transform the thinking, give them methodology, give them the skills that we need to execute consistently, and technology, which is really wraps around everything and gives us a layer of stability and execution capabilities. We're going to dive in completely today into transformation, and we're going to be talking let's just lay out a thesis where you believe that really in most industries that we need to start thinking of revenue completely different and transforming that. Do you just want to dive in and give kind of a thesis on what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ways to think about it, but this idea of, we refer to it as revenue architecture, and I love that word architecture because it's using data and science and fundamental principles to proactively design revenue. And we know what works now. We've seen it. We've seen companies that are successful and companies that are not. And we know why. We've analyzed all of that. And so we have the knowledge to know how to build those successful companies and build those healthy revenue systems if we learn those foundational principles and the patterns and the things that need to happen to do that. And the fact is, it's a different world than it was 5 years ago, for sure. And what used to work is not going to work anymore. So I think it's a perfect time to be thinking about revenue in a new way.
Well, let's talk about very specifically that last comment there where you say 5 years ago and now. Let's set the stage for what was and what is. Tell me a little bit about what's changed post-pandemic area that you're seeing in this world of sales and revenue, marketing, sales, revenue, and what is not. What are some of the things that are not working and what the shift is going towards?
Yeah, definitely. So, through the 2010s, those of us who were in it for all of those years, we had this amazing up and to the right trends, the golden age of SaaS, and we saw crazy success, valuations, exits, all these stories that were coming around, and things were fantastic. And then it sort of coincided with the pandemic, but we hit a crash. 2022, things took a really big shift. And I think there was a confluence of events that happened, but the upshot is that we got very focused on valuations based on growth rate, acquisition growth rate specifically. And we ended up in this world where success was coming from companies that did anything and everything to get their growth rate as high as possible, regardless of costs, regardless of other factors. And that worked well. And we had these exits. But these days now, it is all about how much is the revenue costing you. And we can't just paper over things anymore with cheap funding and throwing more bodies at problems and things along those lines. We actually have to be thoughtful now and use the data to understand how much we are paying for every dollar of revenue and the different kinds of revenue. And so I think, the crash really came from a combination of things that exposed some bad practices and some bad habits. And now folks are at this point where some are waiting for it to go back to the way it was, right? Want to be able to do it the way I did before. It was great. Let's go back to that. But that's not going to happen. And we need a new approach.
Well, when you talk about do things the way that we did before, and let's focus a conversation, I guess, is your main spot that you're looking at SaaS software, or is this across all industries?
Yeah, great question. I mean, primarily SaaS, but I think if you look at recurring revenue businesses in general, and there's the idea of recurring businesses, repeat contracts that are renewing, but also reoccurring businesses where you have clients that you're hoping will come back and spend more with you. Any of those kind of motions where there is an initial engagement, but then there's that ongoing renewal and expansion relationship, that's kind of what we're looking at.
Okay. And you set up systems, and your expertise is to set up and analyze systems through this entire go-to-market plus revenue expansion over time, right? And to look at that as a whole. And I know you advise executives on that. Let's start at the very beginning of that. So let's talk about that just general go-to-market in terms of the shifts and changes that you're seeing in terms of what is working now and what's not. Because we used to just throw SDRs at the problem. Mm-hmm. We would call it a problem. We'd throw SDRs on it, and then because we had the money to back up. But what are some of the shifts that you're seeing overall?
Yeah, I think I actually want to double click on that system part to kind of set the stage, because I think that's a really important distinction. Once a company gets past about $10 million, it's going to operate as a system, whether you put the effort into making it a healthy system or not. It will operate as a system. And we historically have often not thought that way. And we've managed parts of the organization. So you might have a CRO over acquisition, and they're using their own tools and their own frameworks and looking at their own data. And they interact with maybe a chief customer officer who's responsible for retention and perhaps expansion. Maybe that sits with sales, but they might be using a different system, have a different methodology that they're applying. They might be looking at a different source of truth for their data. And while there's overlap and points of collaboration, we've often had leaders making decisions in isolation. So not as a system, but as my part of the world over here. And so this important tipping point, again, I use $10 million as the marker, but once you get past those crazy startup years, it will be a system. And so making sure leaders today are acknowledging that and understanding how the system works, because you can't make it healthy if you don't understand it. And that's got to be the underpinning for those decisions like you were talking about, and not just throwing SDRs at the problem, but looking at what is the challenge. Maybe it's win rate. Okay, well, what's influencing that? What are the things within the system that inform that? And how do we leverage the system to improve it? And it could be SDRs, but there could be a whole bunch of other ways to approach the problem. And you got to look at it in that lens to make the right decisions.
So how do you start to rip this away? So as I start to understand it a little bit more, I mean, when we talk about system, we're talking about the butterfly effect, right? So a pebble is dropped on that call that the initial person makes, ripples all the way down to when somebody is renewing and getting ready for a large renewal. Tell me how you go in and start to analyze and map these things, because it's not just about new revenue acquisition. It's about looking at revenue, like you said, systematically. How do you go in and start to map these things? Where do you even start? Yeah,
it's a really good question. And there's a bunch of different things that you need to look at. And the first thing truly is getting leadership on board with the way to look at the problem itself to begin with, so that you have all your leaders thinking about it the same way. And a lot of times that's an introduction just to revenue architecture and the models that underpin it. Getting everyone understanding the way the journey works, that it's not just a classic marketing and sales funnel. You have a whole bunch of stuff that happens after that initial sale. And that's actually where your revenue engine lives if you are a recurring revenue business. And making sure that the way it's visualized, the way that you need to look at data, the growth path, all leaders are using the same approach in thinking about the business. That's kind of the first thing.
Can I ask you a question? Can I dive in?
Yeah.
You said something really intriguing to me there that I think people miss a lot, which was you say that is first, again, essentially contact as a customer you said that is where revenue is actually actualized. And I wish I could rewind and say it exactly like you said it, because that was it's a different way of, I mean, I understand revenue actualization and when we count it on the books and all those stuff, but I think it's a different way of thinking about a customer. And so do you remember exactly what you said? And if you do, Can you dive in?
I think I do, and I'll talk about it, and you can just interrupt me and steer me in a different direction if I'm not getting it right. But I mean, if you go back and when you think about business 101, right, the way we always have thought about business is that classic funnel, right? So leads go in the top, deals come out the bottom. Great. That's how we think about revenue. That's how we run our businesses. That worked for a very long time. But in recurring revenue, if that's the way you're visualizing your business, consider recurring revenue is not represented in that funnel. It's literally not there. You only have one part of it. So, the first thing is understanding in a recurring revenue business that those things are important, the lead gen, lead development, and closing a deal, but that's just where it begins. Your actual revenue engine, the recurring part, comes after that. You need onboarding, you need the activities that deliver impact so that customers renew, so they expand and buy more. And I always like to joke that a good way for me to get a sense of how a company is viewing their overall business is to look at a board deck. And if you have 50 slides in a board deck and 48 of them are focused on that classic funnel, the acquisition phase, the marketing and sales associated with that, and you have 2 slides focused on retention and expansion, then that's a pretty good indicator to me that leadership needs to realign on how they're thinking about their business overall to begin with, because they don't understand the full revenue engine.
So when we're talking about the dramatic shifts from like 2020 to 2025, and I've read Jocko stuff on the golden age of SaaS and those type of things and recurring revenue, but that truly becomes it to me, is that I think if you look back at board decks in 2010 to 2020, it is all about label acquisition. I mean, everything is about grow and cheap money and sell as quickly as possible. Let's get to status and take our money and move on, instead of building sustainable engines that are revenue creating and gasp, maybe a profitable SaaS company.
Exactly.
And so that's something that's really fascinating, that it's starting to come down to, because it had to break, right? Business logic, that model had to break, because there's no way that you can over time sustain a business that doesn't pay for itself. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some modern monetary theory that I'm wrong on, but
yeah. Well, if you think about revenue just in general, it's so common that when we say revenue, the first thing that someone thinks about is actually just acquisition revenue. But we have 3 revenue streams that are distinct. There is net new revenue from brand new customers. There is renewing revenue, retention, and then there is revenue from expansion. And those 3 numbers are different. What's needed to be successful in any one of those is different. And what's weird, though, if you look at a business over the course of 10 years and you map their total revenue, so all those 3 combined, and ideally it's going up and to the right, but if it is, but then you look at individually each of the 3 revenue streams, the one revenue stream that maps most closely to the company's overall revenue trajectory is retention, not acquisition. And that alone, when you look at how much people invest and how much attention they put on that, it's usually not reflective of that.
Yeah, CS, I 2005 through 2020 or 2020, right? CS was kind of a second-class citizen. Not being, that was not meant to be derogatory, but if you think about it, they were it was more thought of as customer support and action, and instead of the obligatory account management and growth function. And especially in high growth SaaS companies, it was just label, let's get them. And so what is the main reason for that shift? I understand the funding is drying up, but is there other reasons for this shift in terms of the ability to look at this more systematically and to dive in and transform from just new business acquisition to full funnel?
Yeah, there's a lot of different components to it, but if you just look at the data itself, just how much each type of revenue is costing you, so what you're spending to earn $1 of net new revenue, $1 of retained, $1 of expansion revenue, you have to look at the whole and understand based on your specific organization, where your maturity level is right now, what you're selling, how many products, how many segments. You have to look at all the data there to understand what's going to work for you and what's needed to achieve your goals today. Bearing in mind that your goals and the area of focus and what success looks like when you're $20 million is going to be different than when you hit $75 million. So you need to keep the system in mind and all the data for it and constantly monitor it and adjust because it's always going to be changing. And if you don't have that systems mindset and you think about it almost like a scale, right? Where like there's constantly things changing and you need to adjust, like a plane going through the air and it's constantly taking into account wind and weather and all the different things. You have to have that mindset. Mm-hmm.
So when you're mapping and diving in with let's talk about the executive level to make this happen. So, because, and I think it is happening more and more across organizations as this, they start to understand it, but I think there's still a big lack because you still have people operating in silos across a lot of companies. How do you step in then and start to work with maybe a chief customer experiencing officer plus a VP of sales plus a VP of marketing and to tie goals together and to help everybody understand that systematic ripple in the pond thinking?
Yeah, definitely. Usually we end up having at least one champion who comes to us and says, okay, I understand revenue architecture, I get this conceptually, and I see that we need some serious alignment within my organization. Help us. Right. But usually the first thing, and that person, that champion might be from the board. It might be the CEO. It might be a CRO. It could be more of a frontline manager. But either way, the first thing is making sure that, again, the leadership team understands, one, that there's a problem and what the path is to solve it. The first thing that we usually do at Winning by Design, the consulting firm that I work with, is a diagnostic. Because we need to understand what the problem is and what the potential is for any organization and make recommendations for them. To do that, we have to go deep on quantifiable data, qualified, like all the different data types. So hard data, but also interviews, looking at decks, like all these different things. So we need to make this investment in understanding how healthy your system might be using your data. That's like an 8-week project. But even ahead of that, sometimes we first need to get the leadership team on the same page and thinking about it so that they do agree to the importance of a diagnostic step. And so sometimes it's literally just workshops. I run a lot of different workshops where we get the C-suite together and we do some prep and have these discussions of, okay, do we understand what this means? And you can usually find a few spots where there's examples of things not being sustainable or there being misalignment. And having that workshop so that the leadership can discuss and push back on each other and go deep on questions and talk about what they're uncertain about, and then come out of that with an understanding of, okay, we see that we need to think in a systems way. We see that we are not. We see that maybe we don't have data in a way that we can trust to actually see how healthy the system is. We understand there's action we need to take, an investment of time, money, whatever. So that workshop is often kind of the first step. But then, diagnostic work, we got to get in there. Companies are complex. There's a lot going on. There's no one size fits all answer and set of recommendations.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit. Mm-hmm. I understand how you put the pieces together. One of the things that I find that's interesting in this is the evolution of the sales methodology. Right. So when a new business and a new acquisition sales methodology, traditionally it was heavily focused on revenue acquisition, getting that started, walking through processes, but more walking through set processes and discussions to be able to get to an outcome, right? Mm-hmm. What I think is fascinating is I'm finding more and more that methodology is transferring in organizations to more of a conversation methodology. Let's talk about how we need to have conversations with the market, and what are the common things we need to understand across the whole bow tie, instead of simply a new business acquisition. Have you seen that in market? Is that something that you're working to help companies on?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you talk about different sales methodologies and approaches. There's so many different frameworks out there and methodologies, and they all have merit, absolutely. But if you look at some of them, like, BANT, it was developed with a very specific purpose and filled a need in the 60s. And it worked for a very long time, and there's still merit to it. But we're in a different world now, and it doesn't necessarily tailor itself to what's needed today. And I think you're spot on. Revenue comes from being able to fill a need and solve a pain for a customer and deliver a meaningful impact that's a priority for their business. So you need everybody in your go-to-market organization, inclusive of marketing, sales, CS, RevOps, product, everything. You need them thinking through that lens to understand how to identify those prospects that you can solve a problem for and deliver an impact that's meaningful to their business. So convince them of that. Then once they become customers, how do you help them achieve that? How do you set them up to get that impact, to keep getting that impact? Because it's not one and done. It has to be recurring to get them renewing and expansion. So just when you think about methodologies and all of it, putting the customer at the center of it and having everyone in your organization understand their role when it comes to customer impact. Is it to help recognize it, identify it, show them that you can help, actually start to help? What is the role? And that's the whole point of the system, is to develop a system that has the aligned approach and everybody's clear on their role with regard to that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Once you get people speaking the same, I've done this in a number of organizations, but once you get people speaking the same language, it's magical about what can happen if when it becomes very siloed, and like the sales methodology is only understood by sales, right? And then there's a whole reinterpretation of everything else that just happened as soon as you get to customer success. That's a massive, massive challenge. But how do you work with companies do you work with companies to change that vocabulary, to understand the vocabulary of the system and then drive it through the organization effectively?
Yep. No, that's critical. And a system that's healthy has a few hallmarks to it. And one of them is shared language and definitions across the whole system, a uniform data model across the whole system. So everybody's using the same data. And so the way to do that, Winning by Design has a methodology called SPICED, and it works across the whole bow tie. But even backing up to that, like you used the term bow tie before, which is the image we use to illustrate the full customer journey with the recurring engine on the right side of the bow tie with retention and expansion. Now, you need to level set everybody in the organization on something as simple as that. Okay, are we going to adopt this bow tie visual to show our customer journey? And is everybody agreed? And everybody understands it? Okay. Yes. Then you look at the data to measure what's happening across the bow tie. Do we all understand what we're tracking here? We're tracking MQLs. Okay. Do we all have the same definition for what an MQL is? All right. How are we going to measure this point across the bow tie and this one? Are we all pulling from the same single source of truth so that when you are saying a win rate and I'm citing a win rate, they're the same? All these kind of things. So a lot of it in the beginning is, it's not necessarily the sexy work, but it's just making sure that everyone has the same terms and visuals and you have that shared understanding. Otherwise, it's like putting a bunch of people in a room who speak different languages and saying, go ahead, like solve this really complex problem, except you're speaking Spanish and, I'm speaking Portuguese over here and somebody over there is speaking, some other Japanese dialect. Yeah. Like it's all over the place. So just things that are that simple are really the first that happen.
They're super powerful. Like I one point in my career, I founded a digital marketing firm, and it was kind of at the height of, it was really when MQLs first got their, status and lead scoring came in and all that stuff. So it was fun. I got to be an expert on what an MQL is, and one of the funniest things that I found is that marketers got really excited about it. Like they got incredibly excited. There was, content world, I think, started at that point. All the inbound stuff started at that point, and it was the biggest thing is that it was marketers loved it. The challenge that most salespeople had with it was, what the hell am I looking at? Right. So marketers were thinking about this as, I finally have a numerical score. I can actually put some value against what I'm talking about. And a lot of the times the ways it was rolled out, it was, hey, in your CRM, this guy scored a 42. Contact him. And sales would call, and they'd call like 9 times, and they'd be like, the guy looked at a white paper 9 times. He doesn't remember who we are. And then you get these back and forths between the teams, like, well, those impressions counted. And no, they didn't. This sucks. I mean, so you'd get all that. But the simplest form, and you're speaking to it right now, that I found of diving into that, because I was the marketer providing all of these leads to the sales teams, was that agreement. Like, because let's just agree on a term. This is what the term means. We're going to demystify it. It's a part of this flow through in the system. But doing that at every point of that revenue journey, every single time a handoff occurs, and accounting for that, minimizing the communication, kind of interference that you can have, and the ability for miscommunication, and maximizing the impact to the customer is really what this is all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, think about, even if you put yourself in the shoes of a customer, imagine going through a sales process that's several months long, and then you get this kickoff call scheduled, you sign this contract, you show up to the kickoff call, and the vendor says, hey, I'm Jane. I'm going to be your CSM now. Tell me why you're here. You just spent months going into all of this stuff with the salesperson, and now you have to start all over again. And then you find out that actually, what this person thinks is the most important thing is not actually what's the most important thing to you. There's all this stuff that's so easily avoidable if everybody's on the same page, so that the lens that your marketing team and sales team and CS team is looking at to evaluate, is this the right customer? Do they have the right qualities? Do they have a problem we can solve? Are they aligned on what the impact of solving that problem will be? And do we have, the critical events and a handle on the decision-making process and like how they operate in order to help them achieve all this? And just those simple understandings are the same with everyone who's across the touch point. And it makes it so much easier to deliver the impact to customers and make them successful, but it also makes it so much less stressful internally and reduces friction among your team members who are already really busy. They don't need unnecessary stress by not speaking the same language and looking at things through the same lens.
They already have enough work to do. One of the most interesting things that I've come about in this, and a question that I think is a wonderful one to ask when you're finally getting that closed deal for a new business that actually kicks this off, which is looking out to the future and saying, hey, in 12 months when you come up for renewal, what will it have to achieve for you to have this be a no-brainer for renewal? What type of impact is that? What type of impact do we have to deliver? And not being afraid of that questions. I think too long SaaS and recurring revenue companies in general have been afraid of that instead of stepping into the value that they are expected and desired to provide. What other what other handoffs do you see as like super critical in this whole area? I mean, there's got to be tons. There's got to be like contract negotiate, like. I just lost my train of thought. Yeah. But I mean, what other touch points are there? And then we can wrap and close on some final thoughts from you.
Yeah, there's so many, but I think fear of asking questions like the one you cited is a good one. But the other thing is assumptions. Like a common touch point is having an executive business review or a QBR, right? Maybe it's ahead of the renewal. Maybe it's just, at a random point throughout the engagement. But I've seen so many of these where, first of all, it ends up really not adding value for the customer. It's just a tick box. We had the QBR, and you show up in social slides and whatever. But more importantly, is you need to use touch points like that as a chance to validate information. And we often are guilty of just making assumptions. We assume that everything at the customer is the same as it was the last time we talked to them, maybe 6 months ago. Instead of saying, hey, the last time we talked, here was the situation for your company. Here were the priorities. Here were the pain points. What in this has changed? Is this still the same? Is there something new? What else is going on? Okay, we talked about delivering this impact. Is that still the hope? Is there something else that has surfaced that's now a more urgent pain or thing that you'd like to have? And so just this idea of not making assumptions and asking what may seem like really obvious questions, I can go so far in surfacing risk, but also opportunity. Because if you listen and have those skills of asking good questions and actually listen to the answer, you can end up seeing new opportunities for expansion. You can get all sorts of stuff, opportunities for references, everything. And that approach and making the most of every touch point is not just for EBRs or things like that, but on the sales side too. Don't assume that you know everything that they're going to say, or because they're this kind of company, you know that this is their priority. Validate at every step. And again, always with the customer lens in mind. It feels like fairly obvious, but if you actually start looking at your team members and your own self, watch your own call recordings, things like that, sometimes we'll be surprised by the things that we could improve and do a little bit better.
I had this is a moment of vulnerability here. I had an on-site meeting the other day, and it had been so long since I had an on-site meeting, like a true on-site executive team sales call. I'm in a boardroom at a gorgeous country club, and we walk in, and I'm chief revenue officer. I'm supposed to be able to do this. My technology doesn't work at the beginning. Everything I've ever trained goes out the window, right? And I jump into a demo, and I'm so by the grace of God, by the grace of the people that I was talking to, they said, "Hey, Paul, can we slow down a little bit?" It's like, wow, what just happened to me? I went back to my first, but you're right. That continual self-analysis, that goes back to a point, and I know we're running short on time here and we're going to have to wrap, but it goes back to a point that when you outline a system, what's really interesting to me is if you can outline the system and the vocabulary, you start to be able to build leaders instead of doers, which is you give people the vocabulary to be able to execute a job within the context of this system where they can actually know they can make an impact. And so you're not training a bunch of CSRs to pick up the phone and read a script. You start to be able to train a bunch of leaders that are problem solvers that can dive in and understand impact. And I think that's one of the great shifts in this model, because all the way from the SDR to customer support, all those things, I think it's a shift towards thinking of things like, how does everybody bring value? And high level value where they can lead and serve at a really high level. Are you seeing the same thing? I mean, I know you talk to a lot of people, but I just think there's a huge shift that's occurring in that area.
I agree. And it doesn't have to be overly complicated. It's coming back to kind of some of the basics. I'll tell a quick story that I like to use a lot of times when I'm teaching revenue architecture. There's this concept of a keystone habit. And Charles Duhigg, who wrote The Power of Habit and a bunch of other books, he talks in his book about a keystone habit being something that everyone in the system can focus on to unlock success. And the example he uses is an aluminum company called Alcoa from years ago. And they were factories all around, right? They were struggling financially. They brought in a new CEO. Stakeholders gathered to hear what this new CEO is going to do to solve the financial problems. And he jumps up in the first meeting and says, I am going to align everyone in the company around safety. And there's like silence because everybody thinks, we brought you in to turn the revenue around. What? And sure enough, he establishes all these different things to ensure that safety incidents go down to zero, that if there is an incident in any factory anywhere in the world, he, as CEO, finds out about it within 24 hours. And this became the habit that he trained everyone around. And by virtue of getting everyone focused on that, the communication that had to happen, the streamlining of systems and actual physical factories, all of those things resulted in turning the revenue story completely around. And I feel like customer impact is that for recurring revenue companies. If you get everyone focused on their role when it comes to impact, identification of it, showing them how you can help deliver it, making sure you onboard them to get it, and then deliver recurring impact, that can be the thing. The revenue will follow if you can do that. And it's not rocket science. It's just doing the right things, doing them well.
Well, I think that's a mic drop, and I think that's where we're going to end our talk today. But and thank you for diving in with me on all these questions. Yeah. I love systems thinking. I love applying it to revenue, and it's something that is absolutely critical for changing that mentality from invest and divest as quickly as possible for multiple to building a successful revenue engine, right? So how do people get in touch with you, Beth, if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest way is on LinkedIn. I'm always posting about this stuff, so definitely engage with me on there, but reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always up for conversation about this kind of stuff. So yeah, happy to talk about this.
And what types of teams do you usually work with? I know recurring revenue, executive teams, you do executive level coaching. Any specifics of people that you're best to reach out to?
I've worked across the board. I'm an executive coach, so I do that, but I've also helped startups who are just very early stage. Maybe they're not quite operating as a system, but they can do things early to get set up for that. So I mentor startups, but then also working with companies that are looking to scale, to really expand. And I think personally, I love working with companies that are in that more like $20 to $200 million realm kind of thing, but I've certainly worked with companies on both sides of that. But yeah, I mean, people who champion this kind of stuff can be anybody from a CFO to a CCO to somebody on the sales team, whoever. It doesn't matter. If you're interested and want to learn more, reach out and we'll figure out how to get you doing that.
All right, everybody. Well, take Beth up on that offer. She's on LinkedIn, Beth Yahaskal, and it says Flashpoint Consulting, and it also also revenue architect at Winning by Design. Please reach out there. Also, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I appreciate the time, Beth. This has been awesome and informational, educational, and just a lot of fun. So
good. And I will make one correction. Flashpoint coaching has actually now evolved into Elevate, go-to-market executives. So that's going to be the update on the LinkedIn. So if you see that, well,
that is awesome. Okay, that's a good evolution. I love that. So Elevate, Coach Consultants, and reach out to her there. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great. And with that, everybody, we're going to say goodbye from the Art and Science of Complex Sales. Have an amazing day wherever you are, wherever you're listening. Keep shining bright, keep selling well, and have a great day. We'll see you. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Art and Science of Complex Sales. Please take a moment, like, subscribe, share this podcast on all your favorite platforms, and let's get the word out. This podcast is proud to be brought to you by Membrain.com. We are the world's top B2B sales platform. And in the world of B2B sales, with everything from prospecting to business acquisition to managing complex growth, Membrain has the right size technology for your sales team. Our latest innovation, the Coaching Cockpit, empowers your leaders, managers, and team with the information and tools they need to take their skills to the next level and to take advantage of the exponential power of effective sales coaching. With our technology and the top team of sales partners around the world, Membrain is helping to achieve our driving vision. This is, quite simply, elevating the sales profession. To learn more, find us at www.membrain.com. That is MEMBRAIN.com, or contact us via email at sales@membrain.com. Keep shining bright and have a wonderful day.